I woke up on a Tuesday morning in May to find a construction crew building a playground on my front lawn, and nobody had bothered to ask my permission. My name is Zachary Oakes, and I have lived in Meadowbrook Estates in Scottsdale, Arizona for exactly 3 years. The community is one of those planned developments where every house looks vaguely similar, and the homeowners association runs things with an iron fist. I had always been careful to follow the rules, pay my dues on time, and keep my property in good condition. I never imagined I would wake up to find heavy machinery tearing up my carefully maintained grass. I stepped out onto my front porch in my pajamas and slippers, coffee mug in hand, staring at the scene before me. A small excavator was digging holes while 2 workers unloaded what appeared to be swing sets and slides from a large truck. Orange construction cones marked off a perimeter that extended well into what I knew to be my property line. "Excuse me," I called out to the nearest worker, a man in his 40s wearing a high-visibility vest. "What exactly is going on here?" He looked up from his clipboard and gave me a friendly wave. "Morning. We are installing the new community playground. Should be done by Friday. On my property." I gestured broadly at my front yard. The man looked confused and consulted his clipboard again. "This is Lot 47, Willow Creek Drive, right?" "Yes, and it is my lot. I own this property." He scratched his head. "Well, we got the work order from the HOA. They said this was approved community space." I felt my blood pressure rising. "This is not community space. This is my private property. I have a deed that says so." The worker held up his hands defensively. "Hey man, I just work for the contractor. You need to take this up with your HOA. We were hired to install this playground, and that is what we are doing." I went back inside and immediately pulled out my property documents. The survey was clear as day. My lot was 0.75 acres, and the area where they were building the playground was definitely within my property lines. I had the corner lot, which meant I had more land than most of my neighbors, but every square inch of it belonged to me. I called the HOA management office. A cheerful voice answered. "Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, this is Jennifer speaking. How can I help you?" "This is Zachary Oakes on Willow Creek Drive. There is a construction crew building a playground on my property without my permission. I need someone to explain what is happening right now." There was a pause. "Oh, Mr. Oakes. Yes, let me transfer you to our president, Patricia. She can explain everything." The hold music was some generic instrumental version of a pop song. I stood at my window watching the workers continue their excavation while I waited. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 2 minutes, a woman's voice came on the line. "Mr. Oakes, this is Patricia Winters, HOA president. I understand you have concerns about the new playground." "Concerns? I have more than concerns. You are building on my private property without permission. That is trespassing at minimum." Patricia's voice took on that condescending tone that I had come to recognize in certain people who get a little bit of authority. "Mr. Oakes, if you had attended the last 3 community meetings, you would know that we voted on this playground project. The community desperately needs a safe play area for children, and your lot was identified as the perfect location due to its size and central location. I do not care what you voted on. You cannot vote to take someone's private property. That is not how property rights work. The HOA bylaws give us certain rights regarding community improvements," she said smoothly. "I suggest you review Section 12, Paragraph 4. We have the authority to make improvements to community spaces. This is not a community space. This is my property." "Mr. Oakes, I do not appreciate your hostile tone. We are trying to do something good for the families in this neighborhood. I have 3 children myself, and they deserve a safe place to play. Frankly, I find your selfishness quite disappointing. I could not believe what I was hearing. Selfishness? You are literally stealing my land. It is hardly stealing when it is for the greater good. Now the construction will be completed this week. I expect you to be cooperative and not interfere with the workers. Good day, Mr. Oakes. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding my phone, absolutely furious. I immediately called my real estate attorney, Martin Schwartz, who had helped me with the purchase of the house 3 years ago. Martin listened to my explanation and then let out a low whistle. Zachary, this is completely illegal. The HOA has no authority to build on your private property, regardless of what they voted on. Their bylaws cannot override property law. That is what I thought. So what do I do? First, document everything. Take photos and videos with timestamps. Second, send them a formal cease and desist letter which I will draft for you today. Third, if they do not stop immediately, we will pursue legal action. This is clear-cut trespassing and property damage. How long will a lawsuit take? Could be months or even over a year. Courts are backed up and these things move slowly, but you will win. There is no question about that. I thanked Martin and hung up, but my stomach was churning. Months or over a year. In the meantime, they would finish the playground and it would be sitting on my property. I went back outside and started taking photos and videos of everything. The workers gave me odd looks but continued their work. By noon, they had completed the excavation and were starting to pour concrete footings. I watched in disbelief as my beautiful lawn was destroyed. I had spent countless hours maintaining that grass, making sure it stayed green despite the Arizona heat. Now it was torn up and replaced with holes and dirt. Martin emailed me the cease and desist letter by 2 in the afternoon, and I printed it out and drove to the HOA office, which was located in a small building near the community pool. Jennifer, the receptionist, looked nervous when I walked in. I need to see Patricia Winters immediately, I said. She is actually not available right now. She had to step out. Then I will wait. I sat down in one of the waiting room chairs and crossed my arms. Jennifer kept glancing at me anxiously. After about 20 minutes, Patricia walked in carrying a Starbucks coffee and laughing at something on her phone. She stopped short when she saw me. Mr. Oakes, I thought we had concluded our conversation. I stood up and handed her the letter. This is a cease and desist order from my attorney. You are to stop all construction on my property immediately or face legal consequences. Patricia barely glanced at the letter before setting it on the counter. Your threats do not intimidate me, Mr. Oakes. The playground is a done deal. The community supports it. The community does not own my property, I do. We will see what a judge says about that. She turned to Jennifer. If Mr. Oakes continues to harass us, call security. I was so angry I could barely see straight, but I knew losing my temper would not help anything. I walked out of the office and drove home. The construction crew was still working. By the end of the day, they had installed the concrete footings and started assembling the metal framework for the playground equipment. That night, I could not sleep. I kept going over everything in my mind. The HOA was betting that I would not follow through with legal action, or that by the time the courts resolved anything, the playground would be so established that removing it would seem cruel to the children who were using it. It was a calculated gamble on their part. The next morning, I called Martin again. They ignored the cease and desist. What now? We file for an emergency injunction. I will get the paperwork started today. We need to get in front of a judge as quickly as possible to stop the construction. How quickly can that happen? If we are lucky, we could get a hearing within a week or two. But Zachary, I need to be honest with you. Even if we get the injunction, which I am confident we will, the damage is already being done. Your property is being torn up as we speak." I knew he was right. Even if a judge ordered the construction stopped, my yard would still be destroyed. And then what? Would they have to restore it? Would I have to sue for damages? The whole thing was turning into a nightmare. Over the next 3 days, I watched helplessly as the playground took shape on my property. They installed swings, a large slide structure, monkey bars, and a seesaw. They poured a rubberized safety surface around all the equipment. They even installed benches and a small fence around the perimeter. It was actually a very nice playground, professionally done. It just happened to be sitting on my front lawn without my permission. By Friday afternoon, the construction crew packed up and left. The playground was complete. I stood in my driveway staring at it. Where my front yard used to be, there was now a full children's playground. I felt violated in a way I had never experienced before. That evening, families started showing up. Children were laughing and playing on the swings and slides while parents sat on the benches chatting. Cars parked along the street in front of my house. Someone had even brought a speaker and was playing music. It was like a block party, except it was happening on my property. I went outside and approached one of the parents, a woman pushing a small child on a swing. "Excuse me, did you know this playground is on private property?" She gave me a confused look. "What do you mean?" "The HOA sent out a newsletter saying the playground was open. It is on my property. I did not give permission for this." Her expression turned cold. "Well, I do not know anything about that. My kids need somewhere to play." I tried talking to several other parents, but I got similar responses. Most seemed to think I was being unreasonable. A few were apologetic, but said they had been told by the HOA that this was an official community playground. One father actually got aggressive with me, telling me to stop harassing families with children. I retreated to my house and closed the door. Through my window, I watched as more families arrived. The playground was clearly popular. Kids were everywhere, and the noise was incredible. This was going to be my life now, apparently. Living next to a playground that the HOA had built on my property without permission. Martin called me on Monday morning. "Good news. We got an emergency hearing scheduled for Thursday morning. Judge Henderson is taking this seriously. In the meantime, I need you to document everything. Keep a log of everyone using the playground, any damage or disturbances, everything." Thursday. Okay, I can survive until Thursday. But surviving until Thursday turned out to be harder than I thought. The playground was in constant use from early morning until after dark. Parents started treating my driveway like overflow parking. I found trash on my property every day. On Tuesday night, I caught teenagers using the playground after hours, and they left beer cans everywhere. I called the non-emergency police line to report the littering and underage drinking. The officer who responded was sympathetic, but said there was not much he could do. "It is a property dispute, sir. You need to handle it through civil court." "But they are trespassing and littering on my property." "Technically, yes. But since the HOA built this playground and told the community it was a public space, most people think they have permission to be here. You are going to need a court order to resolve this." Wednesday night, I was so stressed I could barely function. I had barely slept in a week. My peaceful home had been turned into chaos, and the HOA had not responded to any of my attempts to communicate beyond that first phone call with Patricia. Thursday morning finally arrived. I put on my best suit and met Martin at the courthouse. We were called into Judge Henderson's chambers at 10 in the morning. To my surprise, Patricia Winters was there with her own attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit named Ronald Kepler. Judge Henderson was a woman in her early 60s with short gray hair and sharp eyes. She looked over the paperwork in front of her and then address the room. "All right, let me make sure I understand this situation. Mr. Oakes, you are claiming that the HOA built a playground on your private property without permission. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor. I have the survey and deed proving that the playground is entirely on my lot." She turned to Patricia. "Miss Winters, what is the HOA's position?" Ronald Kepler spoke up. "Your Honor, the HOA maintains that under the community bylaws, they have the authority to make improvements for the benefit of the community. Mr. Oakes signed these bylaws when he purchased his property. He agreed to abide by HOA decisions." Judge Henderson held up a hand. "I have read the bylaws. They do not grant authority to build on private property without the owner's consent. That would be illegal. Your Honor, we interpret the bylaws differently. We believe that in this case, Counselor, I do not care how you interpret the bylaws. They cannot override property law. Mr. Oakes owns this land. The HOA cannot simply take it because they voted on it." Patricia spoke up, her voice indignant. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is about the children in our community. They need a safe place to play. Mr. Oakes has a large lot that he barely uses. It is selfish of him to deny the children this space when he has so much." Judge Henderson's expression hardened. "Miss Winters, that is not how property rights work in this country. You cannot take someone's land because you think they have too much or are not using it the way you want. That is the kind of thinking that leads to authoritarianism." I felt a surge of relief. The judge understood. Judge Henderson continued, "I am issuing an immediate injunction. The HOA is to cease all use of the playground effective immediately. The playground equipment is to be removed within 30 days and Mr. Oakes's property restored to its original condition. Additionally, I am ordering the HOA to pay for all of Mr. Oakes's legal fees and any damages to his property." Patricia's face turned red. "Your Honor, that is not fair. We spent $40,000 on that playground. The children love it. You cannot just take it away. Miss Winters, you built it on someone else's property without permission. You are lucky Mr. Oakes is not pressing criminal charges for trespassing and property damage. I suggest you find a different location for your playground. This hearing is concluded." We filed out of the chambers. Patricia was livid, practically vibrating with anger. Ronald Kepler was trying to calm her down, but she was having none of it. "This is not over," she said loudly as I passed by. "You have made an enemy today, Mr. Oakes." Martin put a hand on my shoulder. "Ignore her, you won. Congratulations." I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I just felt tired. The judge had ruled in my favor, but now I had to deal with the fallout. I knew Patricia was going to make my life difficult. When I got home, there was already a notice posted at the playground from the HOA announcing its immediate closure due to legal issues. But that did not stop people from being angry. By evening, my doorbell was ringing constantly with angry neighbors demanding to know why I had closed the playground their children loved. I tried explaining the situation, but most people did not want to hear it. They just saw me as the bad guy who took away the playground. Someone spray painted "Child Hater" on my driveway that night. I had to spend Saturday morning power washing it off. The following week was miserable. I received hate mail in my mailbox. Someone left a bag of dog feces on my porch. People gave me dirty looks at the grocery store. The HOA sent me a letter saying I was in violation of several minor bylaws and would be fined if I did not correct them immediately. When I looked into it, they were trumped-up charges like my trash cans being visible from the street for 15 minutes after trash pickup, and my mailbox being the wrong shade of black. Martin advised me to document everything but not engage. They are trying to provoke you into doing something they can use against you. Do not give them ammunition. The 30-day deadline for removing the playground came and went. The equipment was still there. I called Martin, and he filed a motion for contempt. We got another hearing scheduled, this time in front of Judge Henderson again. At the hearing, Ronald Kepler explained that the HOA was having difficulty finding a contractor to remove the equipment and restore the property. Judge Henderson was not amused. Counselor, your clients had no difficulty finding contractors to build the playground illegally in the first place. I suggest you find someone to remove it within 7 days, or I will hold Miss Winters in contempt, and she can spend some time in jail thinking about property rights. That got their attention. Within 5 days, a different construction crew showed up and started dismantling the playground. I watched from my window as they took apart the swings, the slides, and all the other equipment. They loaded everything onto trucks and hauled it away. But they did not restore my property. After they removed the equipment, they left behind torn-up ground, concrete footings sticking up from the dirt, and a mess of rubberized safety surface material. My once beautiful lawn was destroyed. I documented everything and sent it to Martin. We filed another motion demanding that the HOA complete the restoration as ordered. This time, Judge Henderson imposed daily fines on the HOA until the work was completed. Within a week, they had hired a landscaping company to restore my property. The landscapers did a decent job, but it was not the same as before. The new grass was patchy and would take time to fully grow in. The soil had been so disturbed that the grade was not quite right anymore. But at least the playground was gone. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. 2 months after the playground was removed, I received a letter from the HOA. My dues were being increased by $1,500 per year to cover legal expenses and community improvement projects. Everyone in the neighborhood received the same letter, but everyone knew it was because of me. Now I was really persona non grata in the neighborhood. People blamed me for the increased fees. I received more hate mail. Someone keyed my car. I filed police reports, but nothing came of them. I could not prove who was responsible. The harassment got worse. The HOA started fining me for every tiny violation they could find. My grass was too long by ½ an inch. I had put my trash cans out 6 hours before the allowed time. My house number was not visible enough from the street. Each violation came with a $50 fine. Martin advised me to pay the fines and document everything. They are building a case that you are a problem resident. Do not give them legitimate ammunition. Follow every rule to the letter. So that is what I did. I became obsessed with the HOA bylaws, making sure I complied with every single rule. I measured my grass height weekly. I polished my house numbers. I checked and double-checked trash can placement times. It was exhausting. Then one day in October, 6 months after the initial playground incident, I came home from work to find that someone had dumped all the playground equipment in my backyard. Every piece of it. The swings, the slides, the monkey bars, everything. It was piled haphazardly across my back lawn, blocking my patio and destroying the grass again. I immediately called the police and filed a report for illegal dumping. Then I called Martin. They dumped it all in my backyard. What do? Do not touch anything. Let the police document it first. Then we are going to sue the HOA for harassment, property damage, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The police came and took photos and a statement. The officer said they would investigate, but these things were hard to prove. No one had seen who dumped the equipment. There were no cameras covering my backyard. The delivery truck that had been rented to transport the equipment had been paid for in cash with a fake name. But I had an idea. I remembered that when the playground was originally removed, the construction crew had hauled everything away in their trucks. So where had this equipment come from? It could not be the original equipment unless the HOA had stored it somewhere instead of properly disposing of it. I asked Martin to subpoena the HOA's financial records and storage records. Through discovery, we found out that Patricia had ordered the construction crew to store all the playground equipment in a rental storage unit rather than dispose of it. The HOA had been paying monthly fees for this storage unit for 6 months, and 2 days before the equipment appeared in my backyard, Patricia had accessed the unit. We had her. Martin added criminal charges to our civil lawsuit. The prosecutor's office got involved because dumping the equipment on my property was illegal dumping, which is a criminal offense in Arizona when the value exceeds $1,000. The playground equipment was valued at $40,000. Patricia was arrested and charged with illegal dumping and criminal mischief. She was released on bail but was required to step down as HOA president. The story made the local news. Suddenly, the narrative changed. People realized that the HOA president had been breaking the law, not me. But I still had $40,000 worth of playground equipment sitting in my backyard, and I needed to get rid of it. The HOA claimed they did not have funds to remove it again since they had already spent money removing it once. They were broke from legal fees. That is when I had an idea. The equipment was on my property. According to property law, I had rights to it now. I called Martin to confirm. Technically, yes, Martin said. If someone abandons property on your land, especially after illegally dumping it there, you have a legal claim to that property. The HOA would have to sue to get it back, and given the circumstances, they would not win. So I can sell it. You absolutely can. In fact, I think that is a brilliant solution. I contacted a local auction house that specialized in commercial and industrial equipment. They sent an appraiser out to look at everything. The playground equipment was high quality and in good condition. The appraiser estimated it would fetch between $30,000 and $35,000 at auction. We scheduled the auction for a Saturday in November. The auction house advertised it widely. Schools, churches, daycares, and other community organizations all over Arizona learned about the auction. There was a lot of interest. The day before the auction, I received a furious phone call from Ronald Kepler, the HOA's attorney. "Mr. Oakes, you cannot sell that equipment. It belongs to the HOA. The HOA illegally dumped it on my property. It is abandoned property. I have every legal right to sell it. We will sue you. Go ahead." I am sure Judge Henderson would love to hear about how the HOA is now trying to claim ownership of equipment they criminally dumped on my property. While you are at it, explain to her why Patricia stored the equipment instead of disposing of it like she was ordered to do. He hung up on me. I was not worried. Martin had already confirmed that I was on solid legal ground. The auction took place on a beautiful Saturday morning. The auction house set everything up in my backyard, and bidders came from all over the state. There were representatives from schools, churches, community centers, and private buyers. The auction house had done a great job marketing it. I watched as piece after piece sold. The swing set went to a church in Tempe for $4,000. The large slide structure went to an elementary school in Phoenix for $8,000. The monkey bars went to a daycare in Mesa for $3,000. Everything sold. When the auction was over, the total came to $32,500. After the auction house took their commission of 15%, I netted $27,625. But the best part was that the buyers were responsible for removing the equipment from my property. By Sunday afternoon, everything was gone. My backyard was torn up again, but I could afford to have it professionally restored with the auction proceeds. The story made the news again. The headlines were hilarious. Homeowner sells HOA playground equipment after illegal dump. Arizona man turns HOA nightmare into profit. Local news crews interviewed me, and I explained the whole saga from start to finish. The publicity was not kind to the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. Patricia Winters became the face of HOA overreach and abuse. The other board members scrambled to distance themselves from her. Several residents started a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely, or at least completely restructure it with new leadership and reformed bylaws. Patricia's criminal case went to trial in February. I had to testify about finding the equipment dumped in my yard. The prosecutor presented evidence of Patricia accessing the storage unit and renting the truck. Her defense was that she had been acting in her capacity as HOA president for the good of the community, but the judge was not buying it. Judge Henderson herself presided over the case, and she clearly remembered all the previous hearings. Patricia was found guilty of illegal dumping and criminal mischief. She was sentenced to 6 months in jail, 3 years of probation, and was ordered to pay restitution to me for the damage to my property. The restitution was set at $12,000 to cover the cost of restoring my backyard and emotional distress. The HOA itself faced consequences too. Our civil lawsuit resulted in a judgment against them for harassment, property damage, and legal fees. The total judgment was $75,000. The HOA had to take out a loan to pay it, which meant everyone's dues went up even more. But this time, people were angry at the HOA, not at me. In the aftermath, there was a complete turnover of the HOA board. Every single member resigned or was voted out. New elections were held, and a completely new board was installed. One of the first things they did was reach out to me to apologize formally for everything that had happened. The new HOA president was a reasonable man named Tom Chen who worked as an accountant. He came to my house in person to apologize and to let me know that the new board was committed to operating within the law and respecting property rights. "What happened to you should never have happened," Tom said. "We have completely revised our bylaws and our procedures. We are implementing checks and balances to make sure no single person can make decisions like Patricia did. We want Meadowbrook Estates to be a good place to live for everyone." I appreciated the gesture, though I was still wary. The whole experience had left me deeply distrustful of the HOA as an institution. Over the next few months, things slowly returned to normal. The harassment stopped. People stopped giving me dirty looks. Some neighbors even apologized for how they had treated me. They had only heard Patricia's side of the story and had not realized how badly she had violated my rights. I used the money from the auction and the restitution to completely restore both my front and backyards. I hired the best landscaping company in Scottsdale, and they did an amazing job. My property looked better than it ever had. I also installed security cameras covering every angle of my property. I was not taking any chances. Patricia served her 6 months in jail and was released on probation. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had moved away from Scottsdale entirely after being released. Her husband had divorced her during her incarceration, and she had become a pariah in the community. I did not feel sorry for her. She had brought it all on herself through her arrogance and disregard for the law. The playground eventually got built, but in a proper location. The new HOA board worked with the county to identify an actual community space, not someone's private property, and they got proper permits and approvals. They even held a community fundraiser to pay for it since the HOA's funds were depleted from the legal battles. The new playground opened in June, and I even donated $500 to the fundraiser. I was not against a playground. I was against it being built on my property without permission. I attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new playground. It was the first HOA event I had been to since the whole ordeal began. Tom Chen made a speech about learning from past mistakes and building a better community. He specifically mentioned, without naming me, the importance of respecting individual property rights while also working together for common goals. After the ceremony, several parents came up to thank me for the donation. One woman, who had been among those who had confronted me when I tried to shut down the illegal playground on my property, apologized profusely. "I am so sorry for how I treated you," she said. "I just did not understand what was happening. Patricia told us you were being selfish, but she was the one breaking the law. I should have listened to your side." I accepted her apology. Holding grudges was not going to make my life better. The whole experience had taught me a lot about standing up for your rights, even when it is unpopular. It had also taught me about the dangers of unchecked authority, even in something as seemingly benign as an HOA. My attorney, Martin, became a good friend through all of this. We still meet for lunch every few months. He told me that my case had become something of a legend in local property law circles. He used it as an example when teaching continuing education classes for other attorneys. "It is the perfect illustration of why HOAs need to understand the limits of their authority," he said. The story also had ripple effects beyond my neighborhood. Several other HOAs in the Scottsdale area revised their bylaws and procedures after seeing what happened with Meadowbrook Estates. Local news stations did investigative reports on HOA overreach, and there was a push in the state legislature to reform HOA laws to provide more protections for homeowners. A state representative even contacted me to ask if I would testify in support of proposed legislation. I agreed, and I spent a day at the state capitol in Phoenix explaining what had happened to me to a legislative committee. The legislation eventually passed, creating stricter oversight of HOAs and giving homeowners more avenues to challenge HOA decisions without having to go through expensive litigation. As for me, I stayed in my house in Meadowbrook Estates. Some people asked me why I did not just move after everything that had happened. The truth was, I loved my home. I had put a lot of work into it, and I was not going to let Patricia Winters or anyone else drive me away from a place I had every right to be. This was my property, my home, and I had fought hard to defend it. The new HOA board operated transparently and reasonably. They held regular meetings, communicated clearly with residents, and most importantly, they stayed within the bounds of their legal authority. The neighborhood became a genuinely pleasant place to live again. I even served on an HOA committee for a while, the landscape committee. I figured if I was going to live in an HOA community, I might as well have a voice in how things were run. My experience gave me credibility, and people listened when I spoke up about respecting property rights and following proper procedures. Years later, I would sometimes drive past the new community playground and watch children playing there, just as they had on the playground that had illegally occupied my front lawn. But this time, it was in the right place, built the right way, with proper permissions and permits. That is how it should have been from the beginning. The whole ordeal had cost me a lot of stress, time, and money, even though I ultimately prevailed in court and made some money from the auction. But it had also taught me valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, about the importance of property rights, and about the dangers of letting even small-scale authority figures abuse their power. I kept in touch with Tom Chen, the new HOA president, and we developed a mutual respect. He would sometimes ask my opinion on proposed projects, making sure to avoid the mistakes of the past. The HOA became a model for how these organizations should operate, focused on genuine community improvement while respecting individual rights. My property values actually increased after everything settled down. The notoriety had initially hurt property values in Meadowbrook Estates, but once the reforms were in place and the new board was clearly doing a good job, the neighborhood became desirable again. People liked the idea of an HOA that had learned its lessons and was now operating properly. I also became something of a local celebrity in property rights circles. I was invited to speak at a few community events about what had happened and how I had handled it. My main advice was always the same: know your rights, document everything, and do not be afraid to stand up for yourself even when it is unpopular. One of the most satisfying moments came about 2 years after everything concluded. I was at a local restaurant when I overheard a couple at the next table talking about buying a house. They were discussing HOAs, and one of them said, "Remember that guy in Scottsdale who had the HOA build a playground on his property, and then he sold it at auction? That is why we need to be careful about HOA rules." I smiled to myself. The story had become part of local lore, a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. If it made even a few people more aware of their rights, or made a few HOA boards think twice before abusing their authority, then something good had come from the whole mess. The security cameras I had installed proved to be a good investment, not because of any more HOA drama, but because they gave me peace of mind. I could check my property from anywhere, and I never again had to worry about waking up to unwanted construction or dumped equipment. The cameras also came in handy when a delivery driver backed into my mailbox and tried to claim it had already been damaged. The footage proved otherwise, and his company paid for the repair. My relationship with my neighbors normalized over time. The ones who had harassed me either moved away, apologized, or at least stopped bothering me. New families moved into the neighborhood who only knew the story secondhand, and they treated me like any other neighbor. I became friendly with several families, even babysitting for one couple who lived down the street when they needed an emergency sitter. The experience also made me more politically active on a local level. I started paying attention to city council meetings and local elections. I learned that a lot of important decisions affecting property rights and community governance were made at these local levels, and most people ignored them completely. I made sure not to be one of those people anymore. Martin and I also worked with a local legal aid organization to help other homeowners facing HOA disputes. Many people could not afford the legal fees I had been able to pay, and they were being steamrolled by their HOAs. We set up a clinic where attorneys volunteered their time to give advice and help homeowners understand their rights. It felt good to turn my negative experience into something positive for others. The landscaping on my property matured beautifully over the following years. The grass grew thick and lush. The trees and shrubs I had planted filled in and provided shade and privacy. Standing in my backyard, you would never know it had twice been torn up and turned into construction zones. It was my little slice of paradise, and I had fought to keep it that way. I also developed a better understanding of the tensions inherent in HOA communities. On one hand, there are legitimate reasons for having rules about property maintenance and community standards. Nobody wants to live next to someone who never mows their lawn and has cars up on blocks in the driveway. On the other hand, HOAs can easily become petty tyrannies where busybodies abuse their tiny amount of power to harass their neighbors. Finding the right balance is difficult, but essential. The reformed Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, managed to find that balance, at least most of the time. They enforced basic standards while not being ridiculous about minor violations. They communicated clearly with residents and gave people reasonable opportunities to correct issues before issuing fines. They were transparent about their finances and decision-making. In other words, they operated the way an HOA should. I never forgot what Patricia Winters had put me through, but I also did not let it define my life. I had won, both legally and morally. My property rights had been vindicated, she had faced criminal consequences for her actions, and the HOA had been reformed. That was about as complete a victory as anyone could ask for. The auction itself had been one of the most satisfying days of my life, watching that equipment get sold off piece by piece, knowing that it was going to good homes where it would actually be appreciated and used legally. The money was nice, but the real satisfaction was in taking something that had been used to victimize me and turning it into a victory. Patricia had tried to dump her problem on me literally, and I had turned it into profit and a lesson for the entire community. Sometimes, late at night when I could not sleep, I would think about that first morning when I had walked out to find construction equipment on my lawn. If I had not stood up for myself, if I had just accepted the HOA's claim that they had the right to do what they wanted, where would I be? I would be living next to a playground on my own property, dealing with noise and traffic and destruction of my peace and privacy, all because I had been too intimidated to fight back. That thought always reinforced that I had made the right choice, as difficult as it had been. The legal precedents from my case were also being cited in other HOA disputes around Arizona. Martin told me about several cases where homeowners used Judge Henderson's rulings in my case to support their own arguments against HOA overreach. It felt good to know that my fight had made it easier for others to defend their rights. I also learned to appreciate the small things more. A quiet morning with coffee on my patio, the ability to use my own property as I saw fit, not having to worry about someone building something on my land without permission. These were things I had taken for granted before, but never again. The whole experience had also made me a more careful consumer of property. When friends asked me for advice about buying homes, I always told them to carefully research any HOA before committing. Read the bylaws thoroughly. Talk to current residents. Check online reviews and complaint forums. Make sure the HOA has a history of reasonable management. An HOA can make your life wonderful or miserable, and you need to know what you are getting into. My house became a gathering place for some of the neighbors who had supported me or who had come around once they learned the truth. We would have barbecues in my beautifully restored backyard, and someone would inevitably bring up the playground saga. It became a story that was told and retold, usually with laughter, though at the time it had been anything but funny. One of those neighbors, a retired professor named Elena Rodriguez, told me once, "You know what you did, Zachary? You reminded everyone that individuals still have rights, that even small-scale government, and that is what an HOA is, cannot just roll over people." That is an important lesson, especially these days. Her words stuck with me. I had not set out to make any grand statement about individual rights or property law. I had just been trying to defend what was mine. But in doing so, I had ended up making exactly that statement, and it had resonated with people. The reforms to Arizona HOA law that I had helped support by testifying made real differences for homeowners across the state. The new laws required HOAs to provide clearer notice of violations, gave homeowners more time to respond, limited the fines that could be imposed, and created an alternative dispute resolution process that was less expensive than going to court. My case had been the catalyst for change that helped thousands of other homeowners. I also started writing about my experience. I wrote articles for local publications and legal journals about HOA reform and property rights. I started a blog where I shared my story in detail and offered advice to others facing similar situations. The blog became surprisingly popular, and I heard from people all over the country who were dealing with HOA nightmares. Some of their stories made my experience seem mild by comparison. There were HOAs that were essentially criminal enterprises, stealing money and running scams. There were HOA board members who used their positions to harass people they did not like for personal reasons. There were cases of discrimination, retaliation, and outright fraud. The more I learned, the more I realized that what happened to me was part of a much larger problem with how HOAs operate in America. But there were also positive stories. I heard from HOA board members who were genuinely trying to do the right thing, to maintain their communities without abusing their authority. I heard from neighborhoods where the HOA actually added value and helped create a sense of community. It was not all bad, but the potential for abuse was always there, and that potential needed to be checked by proper laws and oversight. As time passed, the intensity of the experience faded, but the lessons remained. I became a better, more informed citizen. I became more willing to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. I became more aware of how important property rights are to individual liberty. And I became more grateful for the home I had fought so hard to defend. The playground equipment that had once sat on my property was now scattered across the Phoenix metro area, providing joy to children at schools, churches, and community centers. That was how it should have been from the start. The equipment serving the community, but in appropriate locations with proper permissions, not imposed on someone's private property against their will. I occasionally saw Patricia Winters' ex-husband around Scottsdale. We nodded politely to each other, but never spoke. I did not know what he thought about everything that had happened, and I did not really care. That chapter was closed. The new playground in Meadowbrook Estates became a real asset to the community. It was well maintained, properly supervised, and genuinely appreciated. I would sometimes see families there and feel satisfied that the outcome had been right for everyone. The children got their playground. It was just in the correct location and built the correct way. Looking back on the entire ordeal years later, I could honestly say that I had no regrets about how I handled it. I had stood up for my rights, followed the law, and ultimately prevailed. The stress and difficulty had been worth it. If I had let the HOA get away with what they did, it would have sent a message that property rights meant nothing, that might makes right, and that individuals were powerless against even small bureaucracies. That would have been wrong. Instead, the message was that rights matter, that the law applies to everyone including HOAs, and that individuals can fight back successfully when they are in the right. That was a message worth fighting for, worth the stress and the harassment and the legal battles. My home remained my sanctuary, my property remained my own, and I had the satisfaction of knowing that I had defended what was mine. The playground equipment was long gone, sold at auction to people who would use it properly and legally. My yards were restored and more beautiful than ever. The HOA was reformed and operating correctly, and I had peace. That was the story of how the HOA installed playground equipment on my lot, and how I removed it and sold everything at auction. It was not the outcome Patricia Winters had intended when she ordered that playground built on my property, but it was the outcome she deserved. Justice had been served, and I could sleep peacefully in my own home on my own property, secure in the knowledge that my rights had been defended and upheld.